Thank you so much for tuning in to this incredibly important story. It's one I know a lot of you care so deeply about, and I'm so heartened that investigator Rebecca Lindstrom really took the time to dig into this, because what we're talking about today is abuse. It's abuse within the Georgia system, and it's abuse that needs to be changed. So Rebecca, what did you find?
I really want to start by thanking the people who participate in Canine Kate and some of these other rescue group pages, because it was those cries for help, those people like really saying we need some accountability on this issue, that made me and others here at our station take notice and led to giving us the time to do this investigation. And what we found,
I know, it's like, it's hard to even talk about. It's so awful.
It's so awful, but there's also so much, because it really is easy to pick one person or one agency and point the finger. And what I found is that this is a puzzle piece. It's a I don't want to say a game, because it's not a game, but there's a lot of moving parts to it, a lot of people responsible, and even the local communities are responsible, because we've got to keep getting the word out there. We've got to keep putting the pressure on in order to get these agencies to listen. One of the things I did find was a lack of urgency.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. You'll hear a report about this, and then it'll be 7 days before anyone even goes out, when the issue needs to be taken care of right now.
Right now. But the challenge is, police have to build a case, or the ag inspectors can only deal with violations. They can't make arrests. You get authority issues. You're dealing with lack of resources, lack of training. That's another big one that I found as we went through this. And I want to go ahead and just show you a little bit of the beginning of our investigation, give you a taste for what we're going to be talking about tonight on Up Late. The land is open, and here, Boss can run free. Boss was the last of nearly 300 German Shepherds rescued from a dog breeder in Montgomery County. Commissioner Greg Palmer stayed on the property several nights during the rescue.
He was the guard dog on the porch.
But Palmer knew it was Boss that needed the protection.
It was just horrible. Horrible conditions.
Months before Angela Powell, the owner of Halo German Shepherds, was arrested for cruelty to animals, concerned citizens in 2 counties repeatedly called animal control, law enforcement, and the Department of Agriculture to demand better care for the dogs.
There were several times I thought, oh, the cavalry's coming, they're coming.
Did they come?
No.
Is that the commissioner, who is actively involved in trying to get some action taken on this case, just loves Boss the way Boss needs to be loved. He says that he doesn't know if he'll ever be able to touch Boss.
Wow.
He's just not comfortable interacting with people given the conditions that he experienced. And while he'd love to be able to have that cuddly affection, wouldn't we all, especially, a beautiful German Shepherd like that, all poofy, he's going to love him and give him a great home regardless. So he's just going to love Boss for where Boss is at. And I think that's the kind of heartwarming story that everyone in rescue organizations can relate with, because we've all had those dogs that, maybe they're just not going to fit a traditional home, and so you want to find that for them. One of the comments that has come up is, I look at these dogs and yeah, they're in mud. What's the big deal? I think the key is, when we're looking at these images, we have to realize they're not just in mud.
Right.
That is feces filled. It has not been cleaned. Those dogs, at that point in time, that's December and January, it's cold. Very few of them had actual shelter. So it's easy to look at the surface, and that's one of the things that animal advocates are really challenging the Department of Agriculture to do right now, and I think that is important for all of us to continue putting pressure in that regard, is it's not about just checking boxes on a sheet.
Right.
It's looking at a bigger perspective. If your animals at a breeding facility are on dirt, well, be able to prove that you've got drainage year-round, so that when it rains, the dirt doesn't turn to mud, or the animals have a dry place to go.
What you're talking about is just so, bottom line basic for a lot of people who love animals. These are our family members. And so to see them in these conditions just rips your heart out.
It does, but we have to accept that there's a difference between what is allowed by state law, which is what agriculture inspectors are checking for, and what we would want to see for those forever furry family members that are in our home. So they're limited to what they can do, but I think they can look bigger picture and say, okay, I'm here, this is a snapshot in time, but you're also required to meet these as a breeder, so you have to prove to me that you not only meet it today, but that you can meet it throughout the year.
Continually.
And I don't know if that's necessarily happening. I mean, certainly if she had been asked to prove that these animals were going to have dry sanitary conditions year round, then it would have been a violation.
Right, no way.
A
There's
lot
no way.
sooner than what it was. Something else that was interesting, we have some body cam video that was shared with me. Local authorities did go out to her property several times. There were body camera footage that was taken on several of those occasions, but because of the active case, this is the only video that prosecutors will allow to be shared with us right now. But even it, I think, is really insightful because the deputy, this is in July of 2018, so this is before the arrest, before things really got to a critical mass. This deputy immediately notices these dogs. There were 100, she says on this recording that there were about 112, that they were all female. He immediately notices them and he asks her, hey, are these all rescues?
Right.
You know, he's new to this situation. She had just moved these dogs from Montgomery County to Candler County at the time that this happened. And in it, she tells the deputy that she's building a sanctuary.
Oh my gosh.
That these are her family members and she wants the dogs and her horses to all be able to live together in this sanctuary that she's hoping to build. What I find ironic is that while she hopes they're far enough away from people that they're not going to be a bother to anyone, no one's going to have to hear their barking or see them, it was this location where a group of women really rallied to try to figure out what was going on. They were the ones that trespassed onto her property when no one else would, and got the photos that changed this situation. And those photos were of dogs or eating another dog.
Oh my gosh.
At first I thought, are they lacking food? I did talk with the sheriff there in Candler County. I asked him, was there food? He said, well, there were feeders. I said, well, was there food? He said, no, they were empty. But I think the sense is more that since the German Shepherds are pack animals, that it was territory. I mean, sure, they were fighting probably for limited resources such as shelter, limited resources such as food, but they were also fighting for dominance because there were just so many of them in one pen, allowed to roam without any human interaction, you know, without anyone coming by to check on them. And it was those images. I mean, it's just sad that it takes an image like that
to wake people up, to shake them and say something is wrong here and you need to do something about it. And I mean, I just think it's so horribly ironic that she's saying, oh, she moved them because they're her family members. No, it was insidious. She moved them because people were catching on to what she was doing. So she was hiding what she was doing. I mean, she was doing everything she could to skirt the law and get around it.
And that is the frustrating thing because the Department of Agriculture says, well, she surrendered her license. I mean, in this particular case, I'm sure most of the people in K9K are very familiar with this case, but you know, when the pressure really began to mount, she surrendered her license, and then the Department of Agriculture was like, well, we don't have authority anymore. It was a court case with her family, because all the family sort of lived on this one long stretch of land, where a judge ordered her to reduce the number of animals on that land that finally kind of got her to relocate the animals. And local law enforcement, they said they were just kind of hoping that this would resolve the problem, that she might go find them good homes, but instead she was moving them to another county and
hiding what she was doing.
Yeah.
But I think there are some really important changes that are being talked about that I know you really dug into that might move the needle a little bit.
Yes, and I think that's what's really important in all of this is locally, both of these counties had no ordinances in place that capped the number of animals a person could have without at least a permit. And now Candler County has put a permit process in place. So now if someone has more than 20 animals on their property, they have to fill out a permit. At least they're on the radar of local law enforcement.
Right.
And if they go above that number, well, now that gives law enforcement a reason why they are legally allowed to come onto your property and check things out. This was an issue here. Those dogs were tucked away from the road, under some trees.
And in these areas, I mean, some of it's so rural,
Yes.
they would never be found.
Right.
If there wasn't someone, it wasn't that group of women that recognized something's not right
Something's
here,
not right.
they might not have ever been found.
Yes, and so in Montgomery County, they may have to go even a step further. They're discussing whether to do a permit, but they don't even have animal control.
Wow.
So when you go to local law enforcement and you say, we've got 400 dogs, we think that they need to be rescued. I mean, you can imagine the look on a sheriff's face when he thinks, well, what am I going to do with 400 dogs? And we don't know if that was a factor in this, but that could certainly delay prosecution in some of these communities. So locally, you can look at what are your laws surrounding animal welfare so that locally they could try to enforce it. But even the Department of Agriculture says there's got to be more buy-in to prosecute these cases. They took these violations to the district attorney there in Montgomery County.
They just washed their hands of it.
And he
I
said,
don't
well,
understand.
I need
I
more
don't
information.
understand.
I asked the sheriff, well, did you send your deputies back out to get more information? You know, he's like, well, we were getting there.
It's hard to understand.
There's that
though,
lack of urgency.
Yeah, there is. And it's hard to understand looking at those pictures and trying to wrap your mind around the fact that they needed more to prosecute. I mean, what more could you need?
Right. And this is where the Department of Agriculture, they don't have the power to prosecute. They can fine, they can write the violations, they can do administrative actions, but they can't arrest anybody and they can't take them to court. So when they do list those violations and go to the sheriff, to the district attorney, there's just got to be more buy-in to follow through and prosecute those cases. But outside of that, they've also put out a list of proposals that would help give them more enforcement power, perhaps even just change some of the living conditions for these animals while they are, you know, at a legal breeding facility. And several of those proposals, the public comment period ended yesterday. We're waiting to hear if there was any feedback on that or if they can just go ahead and put those into place. I am told by the Department of Agriculture that the proposals that were out there do not require legislative approval, that these are things that can immediately be put into action. And the one that excites me the most is the one that says if there are violations and someone surrenders their license, the Department of Agriculture still has the authority, and to me that means the responsibility, to continue to follow to make sure those violations are corrected, especially if they're going to continue to keep animals as she was in this case. So she can't just have pets that are living in squalor. She still has to fix those standards, fix those violations.
Huge.
And I think that within itself could really make a difference, because if she didn't feel she had the resources to do it before, maybe she or others in this situation would just be more likely to go ahead and find them good homes, knowing they can't keep them if they can't fix those problems.
And I know that we get so many comments from people who are so passionate about this, but when it comes to actually reporting these stories, this was a difficult story to report. It was hard to get people to talk to you. It was hard to get the information.
Well, even from the animal welfare advocates, you know, no one wants to step on anybody's toes. Nobody wants to call anybody out. Everyone's trying to build relationships, and they're afraid that speaking out or pointing the finger is going to damage that relationship. At the same time, you know, local law enforcement, they, you know, also aren't quite sure, well, what can I do? What should I do? What does my community care about? How seriously do they want me to take these issues? Breeders are legitimate business in the state of Georgia. You know, they're trying to juggle this as well. And if they don't hear from the community, if they don't hear the outrage, if they don't know that it's important, then it is very easy for them to sweep it under the rug. But I will give credit. I mean, everyone that we knocked on the door and tried to talk to, outside of Angela Powell, talked with us and shared some aspect of their involvement in this particular case. And as much as we hate seeing what happened to those animals, it was because of what happened to Montgomery and Candler that the Department of Ag went back and said, we better make sure that we don't have any of these other cases brewing around Georgia. And they made a list of high-risk establishments. They went to visit them, and that's how they found about what was happening in Berrien County. That's how they found that one of their own had not gone back to look at the conditions there. They went in and got, what, about 800 dogs rescued?
800
Can you imagine?
Dogs. No, and I think it's fascinating that they made that list and that's how that was caught. So it just shows if you put standards in place for accountability, you will see change.
You will see it. And one of those things that I know there's a lot of pressure for them to discuss, it's not in the current list of proposals that may get implemented here shortly, is a cap or at least a tier for breeders. You know, so if you've got 20 dogs, you know, you have the standards that are in place now. But the second you start creeping into 100, 200, 300 dogs, you really have to show a financial capacity to care for those animals, the veterinary capacity to make sure that
time.
those animals are being cared for properly, so that we don't get to these situations. I mean, I can only imagine the enormous burden on our shelters and our rescue groups when we have to have 1,200 dogs rescued in such a short period of time.
It's unbelievable, and I know that so many of you in this community have bent over backwards and put yourselves in really stretched, difficult positions to save the lives of these animals. And I think some of the pictures you've shared with us have been so powerful of just the before and after, even just getting out of that situation, one day out of that situation, these animals are completely different.
Yeah, and we really would love for you to share those photos with us. You've probably shared them in the past, but I'm kind of doing a collection on my Facebook page of before and afters of animals from rescue. Doesn't have to be just dogs. Can be birds, pigs, cats. Oh, I love cats.
You do love cats, yes.
Any of them, because I want it there, and I've pinned it to the top of my page. It's Rebecca Lindstrom, 11 Alive. I've put it there, and I'm going to keep it there for a while, pinned to the top of the page, because I want rescue groups to be able to see it and be encouraged by it and find support in it and hope in it, just seeing all of these animals that can and have been helped. But I also want others in the community who aren't as familiar with this issue and the problems with this issue to see the enormity of the situation, to see what these dogs are coming from and how their lives are so much better later. We do have a photo, Kona. Oh, we didn't have a name for Kona at the time.
I love Kona.
But this is one of those pictures that has come out of the Montgomery Candler case that I know has captivated a lot of hearts, certainly captivated mine. And Kona, she was severely malnourished, help me with that word, malnourished. She had mammary tumors all over. And I'm told she's always going to need eye drops for, I guess that might be like an infection or something. We're going to be learning more tonight for her eyes. She, though, is just a beautiful, happy, vibrant dog. I was told it took weeks to get the stench truly out of her fur, but she's going to be joining us tonight on Up Late.
So excited.
So we're going to get to see Kona, not just the before, but I think it really is important to share with folks the after and to see that there is so much hope in life for these animals. But I'll also say the Coco's Cupboard, they're the ones that have been working with and helping Kona. They took several dogs, I think 6, and Kona's the one that's been the most social of all of them. The other 5, it's just been really tough.
Struggle. I mean, they've been
really
abused,
tough.
they've been neglected, they have no reason to trust people.
Again,
they have no reason to trust
it's not
people.
the injuries you see on the surface all the time, it's the psychological, it's the having to live in fear that really impacts these animals long term.
And that's why I think your series is so important, because so often we see these shocking pictures, like that picture of Kona that like rips your heart out, but you see the picture and then the next day you're just scrolling along in your newsfeed like nothing happened. And there needs to be that follow-up. So I can't thank you enough for doing this and really making sure there is that follow-up, that accountability, and that we're bringing these issues to light in a really meaningful and powerful way. It's so important.
And I know that there are a lot of voices that it can be overwhelming for local law enforcement, for the Department of Agriculture. And I really would encourage you, if you're on my page, K9 Kate, let me know what the questions are that you would like to have answered, because we can kind of put those together in a way and take them to those agencies, try to see if we can get a real thoughtful dialogue going. We have to get away from, I think sometimes they're always so worried that it's just going to be bashing and finger pointing, and they shut down.
Right.
So we want to now take this momentum, because there really is momentum. I mean, the fact that there's 2 pages of proposed changes,
huge. There's
there's an internal audit at the Department of Agriculture, and they say it's going to be rolling. Rolling changes are going to continue happening. Some of them are going to require legislative approval. So they want to get that feedback and start getting those changes so they can be ready when the legislative session begins. So bring those to us, and we'll do our best through our stories and through reaching out to let you know what we find out. It's not going to happen in 10 minutes.
Right.
But we'll be collecting them and taking them, and we promise to follow through on this because we know it is so important.
Well, I appreciate your reporting so much, and I know everybody on K9 Kate appreciates it, and we're going to make sure we link to this entire series. Rebecca has done such extensive, thorough reporting. If you are in the Atlanta area, please tune in to Up Late tonight at 11 o'clock.
To see Kona.
To see Kona and so much much more. There's so much more to this series. There's so much depth. There's so many layers. And if you're not in the Atlanta area, we're going to post all of this online. It'll be on Rebecca's Facebook page, Rebecca Lindstrom 11 Alive. I'll link to it on K9 Kate. And we really do want you to engage with us. Like Rebecca said at the beginning of this broadcast, you are the people who made this happen. You are the voices that are so important for these animals. And we just can't thank you enough for your engagement. So please tune in. Please join us as we continue this fight.
Thank you.